Welcome back to the Ghastly Journal, where we uncover the darkest stories hidden in the shadows. Tonight we journey to the sweltering heat of antebellum Georgia, where the Spanish moss hangs like mourners' shrouds from ancient oak trees, and the air itself seems heavy with secrets. The year is 1859. The nation stands upon the precipice of a great and terrible conflict, though few can yet envision the rivers of blood that will soon flow across American soil. In Georgia's vast cotton plantations, wealth and power are measured in human lives, souls bought and sold, bodies broken beneath the merciless southern sun. On the Thornfield plantation, some 20 miles outside Savannah, the grand house sits atop a gentle rise, its white columns gleaming like bones in the moonlight. Behind its stately facade, behind the imported furnishings and fine crystal decanters, a darkness festers, a corruption that has seeped into the very foundations of the estate. In the slave quarters, far from the manicured gardens and marble steps, a small cabin stands apart from the others. Even the other enslaved people avoid it when possible, crossing themselves as they hurry past its weathered door. Inside, upon a rough-hewn bed, lies Althea, a woman whose eyes have witnessed horrors beyond comprehension. The midwife, an ancient woman named Opal, whose knowledge of herbs and roots was brought from distant African shores, sits beside her, muttering incantations in a language forgotten by all but a few. The air in the cabin is thick with the metallic scent of blood and something else, something ancient and unknowable. Althea's body contorts as another spasm racks her frame. She has been in labor since the previous evening, yet shows no sign of delivering. The plantation master has not sent for a doctor. Slaves are expected to bear their suffering in silence, to endure what would kill most white women of gentle breeding. Something ain't right, Opal whispers, pressing gnarled fingers against Althea's distended abdomen. I feel too many movements, too many shapes beneath the skin. Lightning flashes outside, illuminating the cabin's interior for a brief, terrible moment. In that frozen instant, both women observe how Althea's flesh seems to ripple and shift of its own accord, as though something, or many somethings, writhed beneath the surface. The stories had circulated for years about Master Thornfield and his 4 brothers, about their peculiar interests and the strange books they kept locked away in the study, about the midnight rituals conducted in the old tobacco barn, where screams could sometimes be heard carrying across the fields like phantom birds. Althea had been summoned to the main house 31 days prior, on the night when a blood-red harvest moon hung low in the sky. She returned at dawn, her eyes vacant, her skin bearing strange markings that Opal could not identify, despite her extensive knowledge of both natural and unnatural phenomena. Now, as thunder rolls across the Georgia countryside, Althea grips the midwife's hand with surprising strength. "They're coming," she gasps, her voice suddenly clear and strong. "All 31 of them, the master's children. They're hungry, Opal, so hungry, and they want out." Opal's breath caught in her throat as she backed away from the bed, her calloused heels finding the dirt floor. Throughout her 67 years, 49 spent delivering babies across 3 plantations, she had witnessed many births that challenged natural law. Twins locked in embrace, infants born with calls that foretold second sight. Even once a child who emerged feet first while singing an ancient melody. But nothing had prepared her for the abomination unfolding before her eyes. The cabin walls seemed to contract in the oppressive heat, the singular tallow candle casting grotesque shadows that danced across the rough-hewn walls like spectral witnesses to the unholy labor. Outside, the cotton fields undulated beneath the approaching storm, the plants swaying as though possessed by a collective consciousness. "We must pray," Opal whispered, reaching for the small pouch of protective herbs she kept hidden beneath her threadbare apron. Angelica root, black cohosh, and bloodroot gathered under the new moon. Such practices were forbidden by the overseer, who considered African remedies heathen superstitions deserving of the lash, but even the most zealous Christians among the enslaved sought Opal's ministrations when white medicine failed them. Althea's skin stretched impossibly tight across her abdomen, translucent in places where blue veins formed intricate patterns resembling the ancient symbols carved into the hidden door of the Thornfield Library. That room, with its curious astronomical devices and shelves of leather-bound tomes written in languages no Georgia gentleman had business knowing, had been the setting for Althea's violation. The Thornfield brothers had inherited the plantation after their father's mysterious death during the financial panic of 1837. The eldest, Augustus, had been educated at a peculiar institution in Massachusetts, returning with strange ideas and stranger associates who visited during the darkest phases of the moon. Local society tolerated their eccentricities only because their cotton production had tripled through methods no neighboring plantation could replicate, despite employing identical agricultural techniques. A terrible rending sound, like wet fabric tearing, drew Opal's attention back to the birthing bed. Althea's flesh parted along her distended belly, not in the natural passage through which children enter this world, but in a horizontal seam that appeared to have been present all along, merely waiting for this unholy moment to reveal itself. "They made me drink it," Althea gasped between contractions that shuddered through her entire frame. A black liquid that moved of its own accord. They spoke words over me while the brothers watched. 31 nights they came to me, each drinking from my blood before adding theirs to what grows inside. The first creature slithered forth, not a human child with newborn wails, but something pale and silent, with eyes fully open and aware. Its tiny fingers ended in points too sharp for infant flesh, and when it opened its mouth, Opal glimpsed not the toothless gums of a newborn, but a row of perfectly formed teeth that seemed to catch the candlelight with unnatural brilliance. Behind it, a second emerged, then a third, each moving with deliberate purpose rather than the helpless flailing of natural infants. They crawled toward Althea's breast not with a newborn's instinctual search for nourishment, but with calculating hunger in their ancient eyes. The creatures moved in eerie synchronicity, their limbs articulating with unnatural precision as they gathered upon Althea's chest. Though they appeared newborn in size, their eyes held millennia of malevolent awareness. Each bore slight differences, some with translucent skin through which pulsed ichor rather than blood, others with vestigial appendages that twitched with independent purpose. Opal clutched her protective herbs, frantically murmuring incantations her grandmother had taught her on the shores of Dahomey before slave ships tore their family asunder. The words felt inadequate against such profound corruption of natural law. "Sweet Jesus and all the old gods," she whispered, watching as more entities emerged from the horizontal seam in Althea's abdomen. What manner of seed did those devils plant? A sudden pounding at the cabin door startled both women. The creatures turned as one, their attention fixing on the weathered planks with predatory focus. "Althea? Opal? Master requires news of the birth." It was Jeremiah, the house servant, whose position granted him marginally better treatment, but whose soul bore the deeper scars of proximity to the Thornfield brothers' depravities. Jeremiah Washington, once prized for his literacy and dignified bearing, had been purchased specifically to serve as Augustus Thornfield's personal attendant. His tall frame remained straight despite advancing years, though silver now threaded his meticulously kept hair. Behind gold-rimmed spectacles, a cast-off from his master, his eyes held the careful blankness all house servants cultivated for survival. "You mustn't enter," Opal called, her voice steadier than she felt. "Tell the master there are complications." A pause followed. Then Jeremiah's voice dropped to a whisper that barely penetrated the door. "They're watching from the house, through that brass contraption in the study. They can see inside somehow, been muttering and making marks in their books all night." Lightning illuminated the cabin's interior through gaps in the wall planks, revealing that 20 or more of the creatures had now emerged. They arranged themselves in a perfect circle around Althea, their tiny mouths working in silent unison as though reciting liturgy. Althea's eyes suddenly snapped open, but Opal recoiled at the sight. The warm brown irises that had once held such gentleness despite suffering had been replaced by obsidian orbs that reflected no light. "The vessels are complete," Althea intoned, her voice overlaid with a deeper resonance that seemed to emanate from her altered womb rather than her throat. 31 princes for 31 bloodlines. The compact is fulfilled." Outside, the storm intensified. Through the cabin's sole window, Opal glimpsed the great house on the hill, where 5 silhouettes stood framed against the library's illuminated windows. The Thornfield brothers, Augustus, Thaddeus, Cornelius, Bartholomew, and the youngest Isaiah raised their arms in perfect synchronization with a particularly violent thunderclap. "They ain't children of men," Jeremiah whispered, having silently entered despite warnings. His spectacles reflected the unholy gathering on Althea's bed. "Last month I found their grandfather's journal hidden beneath a floorboard. The Thornfields made a bargain during the crossing from England, 13 generations ago. Something about blood renewal and earthly dominion." The creatures turned toward Jeremiah, their collective gaze assessing him with cold calculation before dismissing him as irrelevant to their purpose. The creatures' eyes, like polished jet beads fixed upon ancient porcelain dolls, tracked a constellation of dust motes illuminated by each lightning flash. The cabin's earthen floor began to pulse beneath them, not from the thunder's vibration, but as though the soil itself responded to their presence. Tiny rootlets, pale as winter wheat, emerged from the dirt, seeking the creatures with vegetative hunger. Jeremiah clutched a small leather-bound volume to his chest, its cover worn smooth by generations of forbidden handling. "The compact requires earthly vessels," he whispered, "but they cannot maintain human form without continuous sacrifice." One creature, distinguishable by a birthmark resembling a crescent moon upon its throat, crawled toward the edge of Althea's bed, moving with the fluid grace of creatures that exist in deeper waters than man was meant to explore. It extended a delicate finger toward the journal Jeremiah held, leaving a glistening trail of viscous fluid upon the leather. "The first Thornfield knew what he conjured," Jeremiah continued, his scholarly diction betraying the education he had secretly pursued by candlelight. "Each generation must provide 31 new vessels, one for each day of the red moon month. Their prosperity demands it." Opal suddenly seized Althea's limp hand, pressing weathered fingers against the younger woman's wrist. "No pulse," she murmured, her voice hollow with dread. "Yet she speaks, she sees. What inhabits her now?" The seam across Althea's abdomen had sealed itself, leaving no scar, no evidence of the abomination that had transpired. Her chest neither rose nor fell with breath, yet her obsidian eyes tracked the movements of her offspring with terrible awareness. "The mother vessel retains consciousness until the transfer completes," recited Jeremiah, reading from a passage marked with dried brown stains. "The final prince requires the mother's essence to maintain corporeal stability." From the great house came the tolling of the library clock, 31 sonorous chimes, though the hour was not yet midnight. At each resonant note, one creature straightened, its form elongating, features sharpening into miniature mirrors of the 5 Thornfield brothers at varying ages of their lives. The plantation grounds responded to this unholy metamorphosis. Cotton bolls burst open in the fields, releasing not white fiber but swirling crimson mist that drifted toward the cabin. The ancient oak tree nearest the structure, long considered sacred by the enslaved community, began weeping a thick amber sap that traced arcane patterns down its gnarled trunk. "Augustus told me to prepare the nursery," Jeremiah whispered, horrified understanding dawning in his eyes. 31 cradles for 31 heirs. They mean to present them as natural children." The final creature, smaller than the others, with eyes holding a calculating intelligence exceeding its brethren, crawled upon Althea's chest. It placed tiny hands upon her sternum, pressing downward with impossible strength until bone yielded with a sickening crack. As her ribs parted, the creature bent forward to drink deeply from the wellspring of her interrupted life. Outside the cabin, the cotton mist coalesced into humanoid shapes, 31 simulacra of field slaves, their features indistinct but their purpose clear. The vessels would require attendants, carefully crafted facades of normality to shield the abomination from suspicious eyes as war loomed, and the nation's attention turned toward deeper divisions than those between master and slave. The amber sap, oozing from the ancient oak, congealed into symbols unknown to modern linguistics. Yet Opal recognized them from stories passed down through blood memory, warnings carved into baobab trees when entities crossed from one world to another. Her grandmother had spoken of such things in hushed tones beneath African skies, long before chains and ships and auction blocks. Althea's body now lay completely still, a hollowed vessel whose purpose had been fulfilled. The nursery attendants, those cotton mist simulacra, pressed against the cabin walls, their not quite solid forms leaving frost-like patterns where they touched the rough-hewn wood. "We must record this abomination," Jeremiah whispered, producing a small journal and pencil from his waistcoat. His hands trembled as he sketched the creatures, now resembling human infants save for the obsidian depths of their eyes. Someone must know the truth, should rebellion or war actually come. The final entity, the one that had consumed Althea's essence, grew more rapidly than its siblings, its limbs elongating until it resembled a year-old child rather than a newborn. It turned toward Jeremiah with terrible intelligence, speaking in a voice that combined infant sweetness with ancient malevolence. "The faithful scribe," it said, gesturing toward his hidden journal. "Your ancestors recorded our first emergence. How fitting you should document our renewal." Opal clutched her protective herbs tighter. "You know this thing, Jeremiah?" He nodded grimly. "My great-grandfather was employed by the first Thornfield. The journal speaks of him witnessing the original birthing, though those vessels were formed from 7 women, not one." He flipped through yellowed pages to reveal a detailed illustration matching precisely what transpired before them. Beneath the drawing in faded brown ink, a notation read, "April 17th, 1767. The vessels walk among us now as gentlemen of means and breeding. None suspect their true nature save those bound to silence through blood oath or bondage. The mothers, having fulfilled their purpose, now reside in unmarked earth beneath the great oak." The exchange continues unabated, one generation of vessels yielding to the next while accumulating earthly power. The creatures, now resembling 31 male children of varying ages from newborn to toddler, arranged themselves in formation. The eldest gestured, and the cabin door swung open without human touch. Outside, lanterns bobbed in the darkness as the Thornfield brothers approached, accompanied by the overseer and several trusted house slaves carrying wicker baskets lined with fine linen. "They mean to remove them now," Jeremiah whispered, "to install them in the nursery as their legitimate offspring. The deception begins anew." Opal reached beneath her apron, retrieving a small cloth pouch different from her medicinal herbs. "My grandmother gave me this, said it would release our people when suffering grew too great. I never understood until now." She crushed the pouch in her palm, releasing a fine powder that shimmered like crushed starlight when it contacted the air. The nearest entity recoiled, its perfect features momentarily distorting to reveal something ancient and insectile beneath its human mask. From the direction of the slave quarters came a low, rhythmic drumming, a forbidden sound on southern plantations, where masters feared the communication and spiritual power such rhythms contained. The creatures froze in unified alarm as the percussion pattern shifted into what Opal recognized as a summoning beat. "The ancestors are awakening," she whispered. "They recognize these abominations from the old world. The compact cannot stand if the vessels are revealed." The storm intensified, transforming from mere weather to something wielding intent, as though the very skies above Georgia recognized the abomination unfolding beneath them. Rain hammered against the cabin's roof in syncopated rhythms that echoed the forbidden drums now rising from the slave quarters. The entities, those monstrous imitations of human infants, tilted their heads in unified motion, listening with preternatural acuity. Augustus Thornfield was the first to breach the cabin's threshold, his aristocratic features arranged in an expression of calm authority that belied the unholy light burning behind his eyes. His frock coat, immaculate despite the downpour, bore an unusual embroidery along its lapels, symbols matching those now weeping from the ancient oak. "The vessels have manifested perfectly," he proclaimed, his cultured voice carrying the faintest trace of an accent impossible to place in any earthly nation. "Prepare them for transport to the main house immediately." Behind him, his brothers fanned out with mechanical precision, each moving to collect specific entities as though they had rehearsed this moment for decades. Perhaps they had. The creatures went willingly into their arms, tiny fingers clutching at waistcoats and watch chains with disturbing familiarity. Opal's crushed starlight powder hung suspended in the cabin's air, neither dispersing nor settling, defying natural law as it formed intricate patterns that the human eye struggled to comprehend. Where these patterns intersected with the creatures, their human disguises momentarily flickered, revealing chitinous appendages and membranous structures beneath the infant facade. "Abomination," Opal whispered. her voice carrying the weight of ancestral judgment. The earth herself rejects your presence. As if summoned by her declaration, the cabin floor trembled. Tiny fissures appeared in the packed earth, releasing not the expected scent of soil, but something ancient and vegetal, the primordial breath of swamps that predated human settlement. Through these cracks emerged thin, sinuous roots that glowed with a faint phosphorescence, reaching toward the creatures with vegetative purpose. Cornelius Thornfield, the middle brother whose mathematical genius had restructured the plantation's irrigation systems to uncanny efficiency, noticed the phenomenon first. His eyes widened behind wire-rimmed spectacles, aristocratic composure momentarily fractured by genuine fear. "Augustus," he hissed. "The binding elements are rejecting the transference. Something interferes with the established parameters." The drumming intensified, no longer emanating solely from the slave quarters, but seeming to rise from the earth itself, as though the land beneath Thornfield Plantation remembered older covenants than those forged by human avarice. The cotton mist attendants began to lose cohesion, their carefully constructed forms dissolving at the edges like fog beneath strengthening sunlight. Isaiah Thornfield, the youngest brother, whose boyish features belied his 30 years, clutched his assigned entity closer to his chest, panic distorting his expression. "The vessels are destabilizing," he cried, as the creature in his arms began to emit a high-pitched keening unlike any sound produced by human vocal cords. "The alignment is fracturing." From beyond the cabin's doorway came Jeremiah's voice, no longer subservient but resonating with hidden authority. "The compact required willing sacrifice, Augustus Thornfield. Your grandfather's journal spoke true. No vessel can form through coercion. Althea's soul resists even in death." The entities began to transform, their carefully constructed human features melting like wax figures placed too near a flame, revealing what truly lurked beneath their manufactured exteriors. The metamorphosis accelerated, revealing appendages that resembled nothing in God's natural creation. Chitinous limbs with too many joints, membranous wings folded beneath false skin, and orifices that opened and closed with grotesque synchronicity. Augustus Thornfield's composure finally shattered as the creature he held liquefied partially in his grasp, its substance flowing between his fingers like molten tallow mixed with quicksilver. From the slave quarters, figures emerged through the downpour, not rushing toward the cabin but forming a wide circle around it. They moved with deliberate purpose, each person carrying small bundles of tied herbs and carved wooden tokens. Among the plantation's 347 enslaved souls, many still practiced faiths older than the Christianity forced upon them. These beliefs had been driven underground but never extinguished. "The root doctors have come," Opal whispered, recognition dawning. "They've sensed the disturbance in the natural order." The drumming reached a crescendo that seemed to resonate within the marrow of human bones. The 31 entities emitted a unified shriek of such otherworldly timbre that glass vessels within the cabin shattered. The Thornfield brothers staggered, blood seeping from their ears as the unholy sound penetrated deeper than mere hearing. Bartholomew Thornfield, the fourth brother, whose experimental agricultural techniques had yielded unnatural harvest cycles, clutched at his chest where an ornate silver pendant hung. "The binding talisman fails," he gasped as the metal began to smoke against his skin. "The conduit weakens." Outside, Jeremiah had retrieved a small wooden box from beneath a loose floorboard in his quarters. Now he opened it beneath the storm-lashed sky, revealing a collection of soil samples, each wrapped in cloth marked with locations. Dahomey, Guinea Coast, Kingdom of Congo, Yorubaland. "Earth remembers its children," he intoned, scattering the ancestral soils in a wide arc. Where the sacred earth touched the ground of Thornfield Plantation, the phosphorescent roots grew more pronounced, weaving together into a network of glowing veins that surrounded the cabin. Within this illuminated circle, the cotton mist attendants dissolved completely. The entities, now barely maintaining humanoid form, began to keen in eldritch harmony, a sound that caused the remaining enslaved witnesses to cover their ears and fall to their knees. Thaddeus Thornfield, the second eldest whose legal machinations had expanded their holdings across 3 counties, pulled a small leather-bound volume from within his waistcoat. "The emergency protocols," he shouted above the cacophony, frantically turning pages with trembling fingers. "Father documented contingencies for containment failure." The book in his hands began to smoke, then burst into blue flame that consumed neither paper nor flesh but burned with cold intensity. Symbols identical to those on the oak tree manifested within the fire, rotating slowly before dispersing into the storm-charged air. From the direction of the Thornfield family cemetery came a low, resonant tone, not produced by any human instrument but emanating from beneath the elaborately carved headstones of 13 generations of Thornfield patriarchs. The earth above their graves began to subside as though whatever had long rested there was stirring to reclaim its wayward progeny. The entity's transformation brought with it a noxious vapor that clung to the cabin's interior, a miasma of corruption that seemed to taint the very fabric of reality. Where it touched exposed skin, tiny welts rose like poisonous blooms, each pulsing with unnatural rhythm. The Thornfield brothers' carefully constructed world was unraveling strand by strand, the cosmological tapestry they had maintained through 13 generations now splitting at its seams. Augustus struggled toward the door, the partially liquefied entity still clutched in his trembling hands. His aristocratic features had begun to shift subtly, revealing something ancient beneath the human mask he had worn for 5 decades. Cheekbones too sharp, eye sockets too deep, teeth gradually elongating behind thinning lips. "The ancestral vessels call us home," he gasped, his voice modulating between his familiar cultured tones and something older, something that rasped like stone grinding against stone. "The cycle cannot be broken this way." From the slave cemetery beyond the cotton fields, where unmarked graves held generations of souls who had perished beneath the Georgia sun, a luminous mist began to rise. Unlike the cotton simulacra that had served the Thornfield's purpose, this emanation carried the weight of remembrance and justice long denied. It moved against the wind, against all natural law, forming a processional that advanced toward the cabin with inexorable purpose. Opal recognized faces within that spectral congregation. Her mother, her grandmother, countless others whose suffering had fed the unnatural compact that sustained Thornfield prosperity. Among them walked Althea, her form more substantial than the others, her eyes no longer obsidian pools but burning with righteous vengeance. The phosphorescent root network pulsed in synchronization with the approaching spirits, the plantation's very soil seeming to exhale centuries of accumulated pain. Where the roots touched the cabin's foundation, the structure began to sink, not into soft earth but into something more primordial, a darkness that had existed before light first touched creation. Isaiah Thornfield, the youngest brother, fell to his knees as the entity in his arms dissolved completely, leaving only a viscous puddle that smoked upon contact with the cabin floor. The substance etched intricate patterns into the wood, cartographies of realms beyond human comprehension, star maps of constellations that would not exist for millennia yet to come. "The covenant requires balance," Jeremiah intoned, his scholarly voice carrying unexpected authority as he stood framed in the doorway, ancestral soils still clinging to his outstretched hands. 13 generations of prosperity demanded 13 generations of suffering. The ledger must be balanced. The spiritual procession had reached the circle of living enslaved people who surrounded the cabin. As they merged, the quick and the dead united in common purpose. A harmonic resonance built between them, neither music nor language, but something more fundamental, the very vibration upon which reality constructed itself. The remaining entities contorted in unified agony as this sound penetrated their essence. Their forms flickered between states of matter, solid to liquid to vapor and back again, unable to maintain stability as the cosmic forces that had sustained their existence for centuries began to unravel. Beneath the Thornfield brothers' feet, the cabin floor grew translucent, revealing not earth but an abyssal space where countless eyes opened simultaneously, regarding the failed vessels and their progenitors with cold, ancient judgment. Recognition flashed across Augustus Thornfield's increasingly inhuman features, the knowledge that whatever force his ancestors had bargained with had come to collect its due. The ancestral spirits converged upon the cabin with the inevitability of tides answering the moon's pull, their luminous forms passing through solid matter as though the physical world held no dominion over their purpose. Within this spectral congregation, Althea moved with newfound authority, her spiritual form more substantial with each step toward the abomination that had used her body as gateway between worlds. The Thornfield brothers huddled together at the center of the rapidly disintegrating cabin, their aristocratic bearing crumbling alongside their human pretense. Scales now visibly rippled beneath Augustus's skin. Thaddeus's eyes had receded into cavernous sockets. Cornelius's fingers elongated into jointed appendages, better suited for ancient seas than Georgia plantations. Bartholomew's teeth had become translucent, revealing inner structures like crystalline formations. Isaiah's very shadow had detached from his form, writhing independently against the wall like a trapped creature seeking escape. 13 generations, Jeremiah proclaimed, his voice carrying the weight of historical witness. 13 generations since Elias Thornfield stole the sacred text from Martinique, since he corrupted rituals meant to honor the ancestors into channels for entities that should never have crossed the veil. The leather-bound journal Jeremiah had protected now hovered before him, its pages turning of their own accord, until they revealed the original covenant, written not in ink but in substances the human mind refused to comprehend. The script crawled across yellowed parchment like living things seeking new hosts. From the slave cemetery, another presence approached, taller than the others, crowned with indigo cloth wrapped in the royal style of Dahomey kingdoms. The figure carried an ornate staff that predated the cotton economy, the transatlantic passages, even European intrusion upon African shores. The enslaved people bowed their heads in reverence, recognizing ancestral royalty among them. The throne of night reclaims its errant children, the royal spirit intoned, voice resonating with authority that transcended death and subjugation. The balance restores itself. The entities, those 31 abominations now barely maintaining coherent form, responded to this voice with visible terror, their substances contracting like living mercury seeking to hide within itself. The phosphorescent root network pulsed brighter, reaching tendrils upward to ensnare these failing vessels. Opal stepped forward, her weathered hands extended toward the royal presence. "Great Mother Adedoyan," she whispered, naming an ancestor spoken of only in secret ceremonies. "We have kept your ways, even in chains." The Spirit Queen acknowledged this truth with solemn dignity, then turned toward the Thornfield brothers with judgment burning in ancient eyes. "The earth remembers," she declared. "The trees record every atrocity in their rings. The soil holds the blood of the sacrificed. Nothing is forgotten." The abyssal space beneath the cabin floor expanded, that hungry darkness swallowing floorboards and furniture. The entities were drawn toward this void, their essences responding to an irresistible summons. They keened in voices that distorted the very air around them, not in fear, but in recognition of their inevitable return to realms beyond human comprehension. Augustus Thornfield struggled against this gravitational pull, his increasingly inhuman features contorted in desperate calculation. "We can renegotiate," he hissed, addressing not the spirits, but something deeper, something watching from within that spreading void. 13 more generations, greater sacrifices. We have plans for expansion westward. His bargaining ended abruptly as the royal spirit drove her ancestral staff into the cabin's center. The wood, preserved through centuries of ceremonial passing, struck the floor with finality that echoed beyond physical sound. The compact that had sustained Thornfield prosperity for 13 generations shattered with that blow, cosmic forces rebalancing with terrible swiftness. The spectral convergence reached its zenith as a cosmic tremor rippled through the plantation grounds, distorting the very fabric of reality. The abyssal void beneath the cabin expanded with voracious appetite, consuming not merely physical matter but the metaphysical scaffolding upon which the Thornfield dynasty had constructed its unholy prosperity. The Thornfield brothers, now more alien than human, were drawn inexorably toward that hungering darkness. Their transformations accelerated, Augustus's spine elongated with audible cracking. Thaddeus's skin hardened into chitinous plates. Cornelius's features dissolved into a gelatinous mass through which ancient eyes blinked. Bartholomew's limbs duplicated and reformed in impossible geometries. Isaiah's form flickered between substantiality and vapor. "The ledger balances," pronounced the royal ancestor, her spectral staff driving deeper into dimensions beyond mortal comprehension. 13 generations of stolen prosperity returns to the void. As the brothers were consumed by the darkness they had cultivated, the 31 entities followed, their substance flowing like quicksilver toward the portal, returning to realms that had birthed them countless eons before human consciousness first stirred upon earth. From the Thornfield mansion came an unearthly groan as the grand structure began to collapse inward, not through physical destruction but through a fundamental erasure, windows blinking out of existence, columns unraveling strand by strand, foundation stones reverting to unquarried potential. The meticulous gardens withered with unnatural rapidity, revealing beneath them the unmarked graves of countless sacrifices whose suffering had sustained the bargain. Jeremiah moved with scholarly purpose amid this cosmic unraveling, retrieving ledgers and documents from the dissolving mansion. He worked methodically, preserving evidence of the Thornfield abominations for future generations, while simultaneously documenting the restoration of natural order. "The historical record must reflect truth," he murmured, carefully wrapping plantation account books in protective cloth. "When federal troops march through Georgia, they must understand what truly transpired here." In the cotton fields, bowls burst open to release not fiber, but countless minuscule butterflies whose wings bore markings resembling ancient scripts. They rose in spiraling columns toward the storm-racked sky, their migration carrying ancestral memory to distant soils, where it would seed liberation in ways yet unimagined. Opal knelt beside Althea's empty vessel, performing final rites with herbs that had crossed the middle passage hidden in women's braided hair. The cleansing ritual acknowledged both violation and vindication, marking transition from bodily imprisonment to spiritual freedom. "Return to yourself," she whispered, anointing Althea's mortal form with sacred oils. "The ancestors receive you among them, whole once more." Dawn approached with tremulous anticipation, the eastern horizon hesitating as though uncertain what landscape it would illuminate. The cosmic restructuring continued throughout those uncertain hours, reality reconfiguring itself around the absence of what had festered for 13 generations. When morning finally broke over what had been Thornfield Plantation, no trace remained of the grand house or its occupants. The land had returned to primeval forest, ancient oaks and magnolias standing where manicured gardens had sprawled mere hours before. Only the slave cabins remained, transformed and dignified, their humble structures now enclosed by protective circles of phosphorescent roots that pulsed with vigilant purpose. The 347 souls who had endured bondage emerged into this transformed landscape, witnessing their liberation manifested not through human warfare, but through cosmic rebalancing. Among them walked Jeremiah, his arms laden with recovered documents, the evidence of atrocity preserved alongside the testament of righteousness triumphant. The dawning sun illuminated a landscape transformed beyond mortal understanding, as though Georgia herself had exhaled centuries of accumulated corruption in a single night. Where Thornfield Plantation had dominated the countryside with its architectural arrogance, primeval forest now reclaimed dominion, trees standing with the quiet dignity of ancient sentinels who had merely stepped aside temporarily for humanity's brief intrusion. Among the papers Jeremiah had salvaged from the cosmic dissolution was a leather portfolio, bound with strange metals that refused to tarnish despite their evident age. Its contents, letters, diagrams, and journal entries spanning centuries, revealed the true extent of the Thornfield abomination. One particularly revealing document, penned in faded brown ink upon parchment that seemed unnaturally resistant to decay, bore the trembling script of Elias Thornfield, dated April 3, 1746. Having secured passage from Martinique with the artifacts obtained from that unfortunate Dutch scholar, I have at last deciphered the fundamental principles of the grand transference. The entities require 13 generations to establish permanent dominion, each succession strengthening their foothold upon this earthly plane. The initial vessels proved unstable, requiring frequent renewal through sacrifice, but I have calculated that by the 13th generation, my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren's time, the transformation shall be irreversible. The entities promise dominion over death itself to those who serve as willing hosts, though they speak in riddles concerning what remains of the human essence after complete integration. Opal traced weathered fingers over these revelations, her expression reflecting both vindication and profound sorrow. "They meant to spread beyond Thornfield," she whispered. "The 31 vessels would have established new territories across the expanding nation, each creating its own dynasty of abomination." Another document, this one a carefully drawn map dating from 1853, confirmed her assessment. Territories throughout the American South, extending westward toward California and northward into contested states, had been meticulously marked with symbols matching those that had manifested during the cosmic confrontation. Each location corresponded to land purchases or political arrangements documented in accompanying ledgers, the infrastructure for an inhuman empire hiding behind the facade of plantation aristocracy. Most disturbing among these revelations was a thin volume bound in material no one dared identify. Its pages contained birth records, hundreds of names spanning 13 generations of enslaved women who had been sacrificed to the entity's insatiable hunger for vessels. The final entry, dated merely days before the confrontation, contained 31 names of women from neighboring plantations, marked for acquisition following Althea's scheduled delivery. The spiritual presence of Queen Adedoyan remained visible even in daylight, her regal form maintaining vigil over the transformed landscape. Through Opal's translation, she conveyed ancient wisdom. The entities sought what exists in all living things, connection to both earth and stars, the divine spark that animates flesh. They cannot create this essence, only corrupt it through willing surrender or violent taking. Your people never surrendered, though your bodies were claimed through violence. This resistance preserved the cosmic balance until righteous restoration could manifest. The morning breeze carried an indigo butterfly that alighted upon the ancestral staff, its wings bearing markings identical to those in Elias Thornfield's journal. The delicate creature pulsed with inner light before dissolving into particles that scattered across the awakening forest, seeds of remembrance taking root in soil no longer corrupted by unholy covenant. The forest's transformation continued beyond mere physical restructuring, extending into the metaphysical realm where time itself seemed to bend and reform. Spectral butterflies, descendants of those first released from corrupted cotton, multiplied with each passing hour, their translucent wings casting prismatic shadows across the former plantation grounds. Where these shadows fell, memories embedded in the soil surfaced like bubbles rising through water. Ghostly tableau of lives lived in bondage, moments of resistance preserved in temporal amber. The 347 liberated souls gathered beneath a towering magnolia whose trunk bore intricate patterns matching those on Queen Adedoyan's ceremonial staff. The tree had not existed the previous day, yet its massive girth suggested centuries of growth, its roots extending visibly above ground before plunging back into earth. A living bridge between worlds that had reclaimed its rightful presence once cosmic balance restored. "The veil remains thin," Opal observed, watching as translucent figures occasionally manifested among the living ancestral visitors stepping briefly through passages created by the night's upheaval. "We must establish proper boundaries before moving forward, lest other entities discover these openings." Jeremiah nodded gravely, organizing the salvaged documents with methodical precision. The Thornfield corruption appears unique in its specific manifestation, but the underlying principles, the exploitation of spiritual vulnerabilities through systematic cruelty, recur throughout human history. He held up a yellowed map marked with locations across 3 continents. These markings suggest similar attempts elsewhere, though perhaps without achieving the advanced stage witnessed here. From a distance came the approaching thunder of hooves, riders from neighboring plantations drawn by the inexplicable disappearance of smoke from Thornfield's morning cooking fires, visible for miles across the Georgian countryside on clear mornings. Their impending arrival lent urgency to the community's deliberations. Queen Adedoyan's spectral form rippled with authoritative purpose as she addressed the gathering through Opal's translation. "The cosmic balance has been temporarily restored, but vigilance must continue. Each of you carries knowledge that must be preserved yet protected. Scatter these truths like seeds across the land, embedding them in song, in story, in secret ritual that survives beneath oppression's weight. When the great conflict comes, and it approaches with the certainty of seasons turning, this knowledge will serve as armor against corruptions yet unseen. With ceremonial deliberation, she touched her staff to the earth one final time, before her form began to dissolve into luminous particles that settled gently upon those gathered. As this spiritual essence merged with the living, each person momentarily glowed with interior light, their expressions reflecting sudden understanding of their individual roles in the continuing resistance against cosmic corruption. The approaching riders crested the final hill separating them from the transformed landscape, their expressions shifting from curious inquiry to stunned disbelief. Where Thornfield's grand mansion had dominated the horizon now stood ancient forest, as though the plantation had never existed. Only the humble cabins remained, surrounded by vegetation that should have required decades to establish such dominance. The cosmic restructuring had altered not merely physical reality but memory itself, a protective measure ensuring that human minds could reconcile what they witnessed without descending into madness. Already, confusion clouded the riders' features as their recollections of Thornfield began to fragment and reform around more natural explanations for its absence. The transformed forest rippled with eldritch vitality as morning progressed, sunlight filtering through ancient canopies that had, mere hours before, been manicured lawns. The light itself seemed altered, thicker somehow, as though passing through mediums beyond mere air. It cast dappled patterns across the gathered faces of the liberated, illuminating their expressions with an amber glow that emphasized the profound transformation etched upon each countenance. The approaching riders slowed their mounts to cautious walks, horses snorting and stamping with evident distress, nostrils flaring at scents no human could detect. These animals, with their primordial sensitivity to realms beyond human perception, recognized the fundamental alteration of reality surrounding what had been Thornfield Plantation. Several reared suddenly, nearly unseating their bewildered masters. "The neighboring overseers will require explanation," Jeremiah murmured, adjusting his spectacles as he carefully secured the recovered documents within a hollowed section of oak he had discovered, a tree whose interior dimensions defied its external appearance. Their minds reshape memory even as we observe them, yet questions will persist. Indeed, the foremost rider, Archibald Whitcomb of the adjacent Whitcomb Plantation, rubbed his eyes repeatedly, his aristocratic features contorted in confusion as he surveyed the impossibly ancient forest before him. His mouth formed words that died unspoken, thoughts unraveling before they could coalesce into coherent inquiry. From the gathering beneath the magnolia rose a melodious humming, neither obviously spiritual nor explicitly defensive, but carrying within its harmonics protective frequencies that further distorted external perception. The freed people had begun weaving sonic barriers, intuitive knowledge gifted through Queen Adedoyan's final blessing, guiding their voices into perfect synchronicity. Overhead, indigo butterflies coalesced into spiraling formations, their collective movements resembling elaborate celestial notations, living calculations adjusting the boundary between realities. Where their shadows touched the approaching men, confusion deepened, questions dissolved into vague discomfort, and the urgent need to investigate transformed gradually into inexplicable desire to return homeward. Among the trees, temporal anomalies continued manifesting with increasing frequency. Ancient tobacco barns briefly appeared, then faded, their weathered timbers dissolving like morning mist. Fragments of past harvests, cotton bolls floating mid-air before vanishing, materialized along pathways that had once connected field to processing shed. Most disconcerting were the momentary apparitions of Thornfield brothers themselves, their forms increasingly inhuman with each spectral appearance, trapped in recursive loops between dimensions as cosmic forces continued restructuring reality around their erasure. Opal observed these phenomena with knowledgeable concern, recognizing the dangerous instability they represented. "The veil requires reinforcement," she whispered to the gathered elders. "What was sundered through violence must be rewoven through deliberate harmony." The riders at the forest's edge now conferred among themselves, voices raised in bewilderment and nascent fear. Their confusion presented immediate danger. Men confronting inexplicable circumstances often responded with violence when rational explanation failed them. From soil that had absorbed generations of suffering, now emerged tendrils of mist, rising like exhalations from the earth itself. This vapor carried neither the corruption of the entity's manifestation, nor the luminous quality of ancestral visitation, but something intermediate. The land's own consciousness awakening after centuries of enforced slumber beneath Thornfield dominion. It twined around tree trunks and curled through underbrush with serpentine purpose, establishing boundaries more fundamental than any human demarcation. The forest grew perceptibly darker as this mist thickened, not through any diminishment of sunlight but through dimensional deepening, spaces between moments extending beyond normal perception, creating a labyrinthine protection around the liberated community. Those within this boundary remained in clear communion. Those without found their senses increasingly confounded by shifting perspectives and impossible geometries. The transformed landscape continued its metamorphosis with subtle persistence over subsequent days. Botanical impossibilities flourished. Species that had no business thriving in Georgia soil took root and blossomed with unnatural vigor. Midnight orchids, known previously only in Dahomey folklore, unfurled iridescent petals that retained their luminescence even under harsh midday sun. Ancient varieties of yam and okra, supposedly extinct since before the first European vessels approached African shores, pushed through soil enriched by the cosmic rebalancing. The neighboring plantation owners, after their initial bewildered retreat, mounted increasingly determined expeditions to investigate what they now referred to as the Thornfield anomaly. Each attempt met with confounding failure. Surveying parties discovered their instruments malfunctioning, compasses spinning without direction, measuring chains expanding or contracting against mathematical possibility. Those who pressed forward despite these warnings inevitably found themselves emerging from the forest at precisely the point they had entered, regardless of how straight a course they believed themselves to have maintained. Beneath the great magnolia that served as communal gathering place, Jeremiah established what he called the repository of reclamation. Here, the recovered Thornfield documents were meticulously organized alongside testimonies from the liberated community, creating a comprehensive archive of both the abomination and its cosmic correction. His scholarly devotion to this task stemmed from profound understanding that conventional history would attempt to erase their truth, replacing it with narratives more palatable to those who maintained power through systematic oppression. The Northern armies approached from Tennessee, he informed the gathered elders one evening, referring to intelligence gleaned from sympathetic sources beyond their protective boundary. General Sherman's forces move with devastating purpose. We must prepare for their eventual arrival, lest they misinterpret what they encounter here. Opal, whose spiritual authority had only deepened since the confrontation, nodded gravely. The armies of men recognize only human conflicts. They cannot comprehend the greater war we have witnessed, the cosmic struggle that merely intersects with their temporal battles. The forest itself seemed to respond to these deliberations. Massive roots temporarily surfaced before submerging again, forming natural fortifications around the community's perimeter. Hollow trees revealed themselves as potential shelters, their interior dimensions offering sanctuary disproportionate to external appearance. The land itself was preparing defensive measures not against the approaching Union forces specifically, but against any intrusion that might disturb the delicate realignment still progressing beneath visible reality. Most remarkable among these preparations was the transformation of the former slave cemetery. The unmarked graves, long obscured by Thornfield's deliberate negligence, now announced themselves through extraordinary flora. Each burial site manifested distinct botanical markers, specific combinations of flowers, fungi, and aromatic herbs, uniquely identifying the souls resting below. These botanical signatures corresponded to African regions of origin, creating a living map of ancestral lineage that no plantation record had ever acknowledged or preserved. In this sacred ground, temporal anomalies occurred with greatest frequency. Visitors reported encountering spectral figures engaged in activities from various historical periods, ancient ceremonies predating the transatlantic trade, moments of resistance from Thornfield's history, and occasionally, glimpses of futures yet unrealized. These manifestations were neither random nor merely commemorative. They represented ongoing negotiations between realms as cosmic balance continued its painstaking restoration. As the war between North and South raged beyond their boundaries, the forest sanctuary evolved with deliberate purpose, developing structures unlike any human architecture. Bark and branch wove themselves into dwellings that breathed with their inhabitants, expanding during communal gatherings and contracting for intimate conversations. The living forest responded to emotional states, flowering during celebrations, developing protective thorny perimeters when fear rippled through the community. The repository of reclamation grew beyond mere documentation to become a literal manifestation of memory. Visitors reported that touching certain preserved documents triggered vivid sensory experiences, the crack of overseers' whips, the metallic taste of fear, but also moments of profound resilience. Secret ceremonies conducted beneath autumn moons, children learning forbidden languages through lullabies, lovers finding brief sanctuary in midnight clearings. Most unsettling were the persistent echoes of the Thornfield brothers themselves. Though their physical forms had been reclaimed by whatever cosmic horror they had served, their voices occasionally emerged from beneath rotting logs or within the hollow of dead trees, fragments of conversations severed from time's natural progression. These utterances came not as coherent statements, but as disjointed phrases that suggested their consciousness remained trapped between dimensions, experiencing eternal dismemberment of identity. Probability calculations indicate favorable outcomes for Western expansion. Cornelius's disembodied voice might whisper from morning dew. The 13th vessel requires additional stabilization. Augustus's authoritative tone would emerge from disturbed soil. These fragments intensified whenever federal scouting parties approached the forest boundary, as though the cosmic imprisonment of the Thornfield consciousness strained against its confinement whenever external order threatened the sanctuary's separation from conventional reality. On the 73rd day following the Great Transformation, astronomical alignments created what Opal termed a thinning of veils. Constellations visible above the forest arranged themselves in configurations matching symbols found throughout the recovered Thornfield documents. The community gathered beneath this celestial warning, their upturned faces illuminated by stars whose light seemed to penetrate deeper than mere visual perception. The entities test their boundaries, Opal announced, her weathered fingers tracing protective symbols in consecrated ash. What was banished seeks new ingress. The Thornfield vessels were merely one manifestation. Other doorways exist. That night, the forest's protective mist developed unsettling properties. Those who walked through its thickening presence reported momentary sensations of duplicated consciousness, awareness of themselves existing simultaneously in multiple locations, witnessing divergent versions of their own lives unfolding across branching possibilities. Some glimpsed themselves in chains upon auction blocks in distant states. Others saw themselves in Union uniforms. Still others perceived versions where the cosmic confrontation had resolved differently, where the entities had completed their 13-generation cycle of corruption. These glimpses across probability's vast spectrum revealed a profound truth. The Thornfield abomination represented merely one tendril of cosmic horror reaching into human affairs, one particularly advanced manifestation of infiltrations occurring wherever suffering created vulnerabilities in reality's fundamental fabric. The celestial configuration remained fixed for 3 consecutive nights, stars burning with unnatural intensity through the forest canopy. Within this astronomical window, the protective boundaries surrounding the former Thornfield land grew increasingly permeable. Temporal anomalies accelerated, future and past bleeding into present with alarming frequency. Children reported conversations with ancestors they could not possibly have known. Elders found themselves momentarily transported to scenes from their youth, able to touch and interact with memories that should have remained fixed in history's amber. On the 3rd night, as the constellation reached perfect alignment with the markings found throughout the Thornfield documents, a profound stillness descended upon the sanctuary. The persistent background chorus of nocturnal creatures fell silent. Even the breathing forest architecture ceased its subtle movements, holding itself in suspended animation, as though awaiting cosmic judgment. Jeremiah and Opal stood beneath the great magnolia, its massive trunk now inscribed with elaborate patterns that had manifested gradually since the transformation. These markings, neither carved nor painted but emerging from within the living wood itself, formed a complete cosmological map linking the Thornfield abomination to 12 other sites across the globe. "The pattern completes itself," Jeremiah whispered, adjusting his spectacles as he compared the arboreal markings to a particular document retrieved from Augustus Thornfield's private study. 13 nexus points, 13 generations, 13 corrupted bloodlines attempting simultaneous manifestation. Opal's weathered hand traced a specific constellation on the magnolia's bark, her fingers trembling not with age, but with recognition. "My grandmother spoke of this alignment, the devouring stars. When they form this pattern, the barriers between realms grow thinnest. Above them, the night sky rippled like disturbed water, stars momentarily elongating into streaks of light that formed impossible geometries. The forest sanctuary responded with escalating defensive measures, phosphorescent roots erupting from soil to create elaborate protective sigils, ancient trees bending to form arcane structures whose architectural purpose transcended human comprehension. From the direction of the former Thornfield mansion grounds came a sound that penetrated bone and soul. Not the expected trumpet of approaching federal troops, but something more fundamental. A cosmic exhalation that carried within its harmonics the voices of 13 generations of victims, their collective suffering finally articulated through a frequency that vibrated at reality's foundational level. The repository documents levitated from their careful organization, pages illuminated from within as though text and diagrams had been inscribed not with ink, but with captured starlight now fighting for release. They arranged themselves in concentric circles around Jeremiah and Opal, forming a three-dimensional manifestation of the Thornfield Covenant, its true form revealed as something resembling both mathematical equation and musical score. "They sought to create a lattice," Jeremiah breathed, suddenly comprehending the full scope of the horror. "A living framework spanning generations, with human suffering as both foundation and mortar. The Thornfields were merely one pillar supporting a structure designed to bridge incompatible realities." As this revelation crystallized, the magnolia tree split vertically along its trunk, not in destruction but in deliberate revelation. Within its exposed heart stood Queen Adadoin, her spectral form now fully materialized, royal staff blazing with concentrated starlight that pushed back against the cosmic darkness pressing down from above. "The final confrontation transcends this single sanctuary," she announced, her voice resonating through dimensions. "What you have witnessed here repeats itself across 13 points of convergence. The true war encompasses continents, centuries, and realms beyond mortal comprehension." The forest sanctuary persisted long after the cannons of civil war fell silent across Georgia's ravaged landscapes. A verdant enigma that cartographers carefully omitted from official records, with only faint notations warning of unreliable compass readings and inconsistent surveying results. Federal Reconstruction officials who attempted to catalog the former plantation lands encountered inexplicable difficulties. Theodolites measuring impossible angles, chain surveys that never closed properly, and most tellingly, an overwhelming desire to depart the area before completing their assigned documentation. Among freedmen communities throughout the South, whispered accounts circulated of the place where the land remembers and protects its own. These stories traveled along underground networks established during bondage, carrying with them fragments of truth wrapped in protective metaphor. Former plantation owners, when pressed about the conspicuous absence of Thornfield records in county ledgers, developed sudden afflictions of memory, their aristocratic features contorting with uncomprehending distress before changing the subject entirely. Descendants of those 347 souls who witnessed the cosmic reckoning established themselves as respected community leaders in the turbulent decades following emancipation. Their children displayed remarkable resilience against both natural diseases and supernatural influences, carrying invisible protections manifested through inexplicable good fortune during racial persecutions that devastated other black communities. Geological surveys conducted in 1927 by Miskatonic University researchers identified unusual electromagnetic properties throughout the region, with their equipment failing precisely at the boundaries of what had once been Thornfield Plantation. Their preliminary report described a localized disruption in conventional spacetime, suggesting either unprecedented geological anomalies or the influence of factors beyond current scientific frameworks. The final published paper omitted these observations entirely, though several graduate students associated with the expedition subsequently abandoned promising academic careers to pursue obscure theological studies. The repository of reclamation survived through generations, its contents preserved by descendants who understood their sacred obligation without fully comprehending the cosmic horror their ancestors had confronted. Documents were carefully recopied when age threatened their legibility, with each transcription surrounded by protective rituals derived from practices Opal had established. These archivists noticed how certain passages seemed to resist documentation, words shifting between transcriptions, diagrams subtly altering their configurations when left unobserved, as though the knowledge itself possessed agency and intent. Throughout subsequent centuries, 13 synchronous events periodically occurred at globally distributed locations corresponding to the constellation map revealed in the Magnolia's heart. Earthquakes with epicenters of mathematically perfect depth, volcanic eruptions producing ash clouds that formed recognizable symbols visible only from stratospheric altitudes, sudden mass migrations of butterflies whose collective movement resembled flowing script when viewed from sufficient elevation. Each manifestation lasted precisely 13 days before subsiding, leaving behind subtle alterations in local folklore and inexplicable botanical transformations. The forest itself continued its impossible existence, defying botanical succession patterns that should have eventually transformed its composition. Species that scientific consensus deemed incompatible thrived in harmonious proximity, their root systems intertwining beneath soil enriched by cosmic realignment. Visiting botanists frequently departed with specimen collections that mysteriously transformed into entirely different species upon crossing the invisible boundary that still maintained separation between the sanctuary and conventional reality. In the autumn of 2023, amid global disruptions that seemed increasingly untethered from conventional causation, the 13th cyclical alignment approached completion. Atmospheric phenomena manifested with troubling synchronicity across 13 globally distributed points. Peculiar auroral displays visible at latitudes where such occurrences defied meteorological understanding, their undulating patterns forming recognizable fragments of the arcane script, first documented in Jeremiah's meticulous transcriptions. Within the Georgia sanctuary, now surrounded by suburban developments whose residents remained curiously disinclined to venture beyond certain property lines, the ancient magnolia reached unprecedented flowering despite the season. Its blossoms, midnight blue with iridescent anthers that pulsed with interior luminescence, released pollen that drifted in mathematical patterns rather than yielding to prevailing winds. Ornithologists reported unprecedented behavioral modifications among regional bird populations, with murmuration patterns forming complex glyphs visible only when photographed using specialized spectral filters. Descendants of the original 347 souls, now scattered across continents yet maintaining ancestral connections through rituals disguised as family reunions, experienced simultaneous dreams of Queen Adedoyan's return. These nocturnal visitations carried urgent warnings delivered through symbolic language that penetrated collective consciousness, despite educational and linguistic differences among recipients. Upon waking, many discovered inexplicable botanical manifestations upon their properties: midnight orchids blooming in Manhattan window boxes, phosphorescent root systems emerging through concrete foundations in Lagos apartments, indigo butterflies congregating upon Parisian balconies. Academic institutions monitoring cosmic radiation detected unprecedented fluctuations corresponding precisely to calculations derived from Thornfield documents now preserved in climate-controlled university archives, their existence carefully obscured within deliberately mundane-appearing collections. Research teams analyzing these patterns observed disquieting correlations with global socio-political developments, the emergence of charismatic leaders whose rhetoric contained subliminal harmonic structures matching those documented in Jeremiah's transcriptions, multinational corporate expansions following geographical patterns corresponding exactly to the constellation map revealed in the Magnolia's heart. Most troubling were archaeological discoveries unearthed during construction projects at locations precisely corresponding to the 12 sites identified in the repository documentation. Each excavation revealed architectural anomalies predating known human civilization. Foundations consisting of mathematically perfect stone arrangements surrounding central chambers whose dimensions created acoustic properties that amplified certain frequencies while completely nullifying others. Carbon dating consistently produced impossible results, with organic materials simultaneously indicating origins thousands of years apart. Within these chambers, archaeologists discovered inscriptions matching those that had manifested upon the Georgia magnolia, their presence in globally distributed locations confirming what Jeremiah had theorized centuries earlier. The Thornfield abomination represented merely one node in a vast network designed to facilitate incursion from realms beyond human comprehension. The entities had not been defeated but merely delayed, their 13-generation cycle temporarily disrupted rather than permanently terminated. Contemporary theoretical physicists, working with quantum computational models beyond public knowledge, concluded that conventional reality itself constituted merely a protective membrane between incompatible dimensional states, a barrier gradually weakening through cycles of human suffering systematically cultivated across centuries. The cosmic restructuring witnessed by Opal and Jeremiah had temporarily reinforced this membrane, but entropic deterioration continued its inexorable progression toward inevitable convergence. As the 13th alignment reached its culmination, the forest sanctuary in Georgia manifested phenomena that transcended conventional understanding. The ancient magnolia, that living repository of cosmic memory, shed its iridescent blossoms in a synchronized cascade, each petal descending with deliberate purpose rather than chaotic dispersion. Upon touching earth, these petals transformed into perfect replicas of the indigo butterflies that had first emerged during the original confrontation, their wings bearing microscopic inscriptions revealing the final verses of Queen Adedoyan's prophesied return. Throughout the globally distributed nodes, descendants of the original witnesses experienced simultaneous awakening, not merely from physical sleep, but from the collective amnesia that mortality imposes upon cosmic awareness. They rose from beds in Tokyo apartments, Nairobi estates, London flats, and Rio favelas, their disparate lives suddenly connected through ancestral memory that transcended conventional heredity. Each discovered upon their skin temporary markings resembling those that had adorned Althea's body before the birth of abomination, not as recurrence of corruption, but as protective sigils activating long-dormant spiritual immunities passed through bloodlines. Within the repository's most carefully preserved documents, pages long thought blank suddenly revealed their hidden contents, text manifesting not through chemical reaction, but through cosmic alignment rendering visible what had always existed beyond conventional perception. These revelations completed Jeremiah's meticulous documentation, providing precise coordinates for the 13th confrontation and detailing rituals requiring synchronized performance across continents to seal permanently what had been temporarily mended centuries before. The cosmic membrane separating incompatible realities, that protective barrier the Thornfield entities had nearly penetrated, now rippled with renewed resilience. Earth itself seemed to exhale collective relief through geological manifestations that puzzled seismologists worldwide, simultaneous harmonic tremors registering at precisely 13 points globally, their waveforms creating interference patterns that strengthened rather than degraded structural integrity within the fabric of conventional existence. In quantum observatories monitoring reality's fundamental vibrations, scientists witnessed unprecedented coherence emerging from previously chaotic systems, mathematical harmony spontaneously manifesting across measurements, as though reality itself were being retuned to frequencies incompatible with intrusion. The calculations derived from these observations corresponded exactly to numerical sequences embedded within Jeremiah's transcriptions, confirming his centuries-old hypothesis that cosmic horror could be permanently contained through properly calibrated harmonic opposition. The Thornfield entities, those ancient consciousnesses that had nearly manifested through 13 generations of corrupted vessels, found their remaining tendrils systematically excised from potential access points. Their non-Euclidean geometries collapsed upon themselves, forced into recursive loops of self-referential imprisonment with no external manifestation possible. Most profound was the transformation occurring within human consciousness itself. The systematic cultivation of suffering that had facilitated cosmic corruption now encountered unprecedented resistance, not through naive optimism, but through unflinching recognition of interconnected responsibility. The quantum entanglement of consciousness across globally distributed descendants created a resilient network of awareness that recognized incursion attempts with immediate clarity, their collective vigilance maintaining boundaries that individual perception could never sustain. The 13th alignment completed not with apocalyptic confrontation, but with cosmic reintegration. Balance restored not through violence, but through harmony, deliberately constructed across generations of protective stewardship. What had begun with Althea's suffering culminated in universal restoration. The cosmic ledger finally balanced through recognition rather than retribution. Within the archives of the Smithsonian Institution's restricted collections lies a series of daguerreotypes discovered during the 1972 renovation of a former Union officer's Virginia estate. These images, captured in 1863 by a military photographer documenting Sherman's march, depict what appears to be an impossible forest standing amid scorched Georgia countryside. The accompanying field notes, penned in a hand that grows increasingly erratic across 13 pages, describe the regiment's encounter with this anomalous woodland. The men refused to enter beyond the perimeter. Those who ventured 20 paces returned disoriented, claiming to have walked for hours through constantly shifting landscapes. Lane Towers. Harrison reports encountering a gathering beneath a magnificent magnolia, wherein colored folk conversed freely with translucent figures whose garments matched no contemporary fashion. Most disturbing was his account of documents suspended in air, pages turning without human touch, revealing diagrams identical to those confiscated from suspected Confederate occultists operating in New Orleans. Modern spectrographic analysis of these images reveals impossible botanical specimens flourishing together. Arctic lichens alongside tropical orchids, prehistoric ferns coexisting with flowering species that would not be cataloged by science until the early 20th century. More disturbing are the patterns visible within the forest's canopy when the images are digitally enhanced. Precise mathematical configurations matching those discovered beneath ancient megalithic structures across 13 globally distributed sites. Soil samples surreptitiously collected by geological surveys conducted in 1987 reveal isotopic inconsistencies suggesting localized temporal distortion. Carbon dating produces contradictory results, with organic materials simultaneously indicating origins separated by millennia. Microbiological analysis identifies fungal networks possessing molecular structures that periodically reconfigure themselves through patterns corresponding exactly to celestial alignments. Perhaps most revealing is correspondence between General William Tecumseh Sherman and an unnamed federal official, discovered within a hidden compartment of the general's personal writing desk during museum conservation. I cannot in good conscience include the anomalous forest in official reports. The men who attempted thorough reconnaissance returned, changed in ways I cannot adequately articulate. Their accounts, while individually inconsistent, collectively suggest an organized community existing beyond conventional physical constraints. Most troubling are their unanimous descriptions of documentation, detailing systematic exploitation of human suffering to facilitate what the inhabitants termed cosmic corruption. I have ordered the area unmarked on official maps and established a cordon of trusted men who understand the necessity of redirecting curious travelers. Some horrors, I have concluded, exceed even those of our present fratricidal conflict and are best left undisturbed by conventional authority. Atmospheric monitoring stations established surreptitiously around the sanctuary's perimeter in 2004 measure consistent quantum fluctuations that mathematical models suggest would perfectly neutralize attempts at cross-dimensional intrusion. These measurements, when plotted across time, reveal patterns corresponding exactly to glyphs found within the Thornfield documentation, not as invitation to cosmic horror, but as perpetual prohibition against its manifestation. The collective vigilance established through Opal's rituals and Jeremiah's documentation continues uninterrupted, a living barrier maintained through ancestral memory rather than physical infrastructure. What began as desperate resistance against unimaginable corruption has evolved into humanity's most enduring cosmic defense, unseen, unacknowledged, yet fundamentally essential to our continued existence within a reality permanently altered by what transpired in a Georgia forest where 31 abominations were born and banished in a single night. Beneath the towering magnolia trees of what was once Thornfield Plantation, contemporary visitors occasionally report sensations that science cannot explain: a sudden coolness against skin despite summer heat, whispered conversations that cease when directly approached, and most commonly, an overwhelming compulsion to leave certain areas undisturbed. Local conservation authorities have repeatedly abandoned plans to develop nature trails through the most ancient sections of forest, each project mysteriously losing funding or encountering regulatory obstacles that materialize from seemingly nowhere. Children born to families descending from the original 347 souls exhibit peculiar birthmarks resembling indigo butterflies, typically manifested between shoulder blades or across palms. Medical journals contain isolated case studies documenting these dermatological anomalies, noting their perfect symmetry and tendency to become more pronounced during specific astronomical alignments. More remarkable are the documented instances of these descendants instinctively avoiding individuals who would later be exposed as predators or abusers, a protective intuition functioning with inexplicable accuracy across generations. The linguistic patterns of these descendants reveal subtle anomalies that sociolinguists have struggled to categorize. Their speech occasionally incorporates cadences and tonal variations that enhance emotional resonance beyond conventional communication, particularly when discussing matters of justice or historical remembrance. These vocal patterns induce measurable neurological responses in listeners, creating temporary neural synchronization that facilitates empathic understanding beyond ordinary language capability. Agricultural studies conducted at university research stations throughout Georgia document unexplainable soil composition differences precisely following the boundaries of the former plantation. These variations manifest in crop yields that consistently exceed projections, particularly during years when surrounding farms suffer drought conditions. Microbiological analysis reveals mycelial networks of unprecedented complexity, their structures forming patterns identical to those found in the repository documentation when viewed under electron microscopy. Archives throughout the American South continue reporting preservation anomalies affecting Thornfield-related materials. Documents mentioning the plantation resist deterioration despite inadequate storage conditions. Conversely, materials attempting to falsify or minimize accounts of atrocities committed there decompose at accelerated rates regardless of conservation efforts. Museum curators report inexplicable migration of Thornfield artifacts within secure storage facilities, items consistently relocating to positions corresponding to constellational arrangements documented in Jeremiah's transcriptions. The cosmic realignment continues manifesting through subtle reality adjustments that resist scientific categorization. Weather patterns across the 13 globally distributed nodes exhibit perfect mathematical correspondence despite geographical isolation. Chronometric instruments operating within these zones periodically register microsecond variations that, when plotted across extended timelines, reveal harmonic patterns identical to those documented during the original confrontation. Most profoundly, the collective unconscious has incorporated protective mechanisms against entities seeking ingress through human suffering. Psychological studies document unprecedented resilience among populations enduring systemic trauma, their consciousness spontaneously generating symbolic frameworks that resist external corruption through mechanisms eerily similar to those Opal established through ritual practice. What began as desperate defense against specific abomination has evolved into humanity's permanent immunological response against cosmic horror, an inherited vigilance passing through generations not through conscious instruction, but through fundamental realignment of how human awareness interfaces with reality itself. The truth lingered like morning mist among ancient trees, neither fully revealed nor entirely concealed. Those who sought it found themselves wandering circular paths that led simultaneously nowhere and everywhere, as though the forest sanctuary itself determined what knowledge visitors might safely bear away. Perhaps most remarkable was the subtle manifestation of Althea's continued presence throughout the transformed landscape. Her consciousness, rather than ascending to conventional afterlife, had become inextricably interwoven with the forest's protective essence. The midnight orchids that bloomed during celestial alignments contained microscopic structures identical to the human iris, 31,000 perfect replicas of Althea's eyes, forever vigilant against corruption's return. She had transcended mere martyrdom to become guardian incarnate, her suffering transformed into protection that would outlast nations and epochs. Within certain university physics departments, theoretical models suggested something unprecedented about the sanctuary's fundamental nature. The forest existed simultaneously in multiple probability states, occupying quantum superpositions that conventional reality could not support. Visitors physically entered one manifestation while unconsciously experiencing others, explaining the disorientation and temporal inconsistencies reported throughout centuries of documentation. The forest had become a living equation, balancing cosmic forces, a perpetual calculation maintaining separation between incompatible dimensional realities. Among the descendants carrying protective birthmarks, dreams often revealed fragments of universal truth too profound for waking comprehension. These nocturnal visitations contained mathematical principles that occasionally manifested in their professional work. Architectural designs incorporating impossible angles that nonetheless stood against earthquakes, musical compositions whose harmonics induced measurable healing responses, agricultural innovations that restored balance to corrupted ecosystems. The cosmic knowledge imparted through Althea's sacrifice continued flowing through bloodlines, expressing itself through creative works that subtly reinforced reality's protective boundaries. Perhaps most profound was the realization that the Thornfield corruption represented merely one manifestation of a recurring cosmic pattern, entities seeking ingress through exploitation of suffering, deliberately cultivated across generations. Similar patterns had manifested throughout human history, from ancient Sumerian priest-kings to medieval inquisitors to modern corporate exploitation. The 13 nodes represented not merely physical locations but archetypal vulnerabilities in human consciousness, points where collective trauma created potential breaches in reality's protective membrane. What Jeremiah and Opal had initiated through their resistance was nothing less than humanity's immunological response to cosmic infection, a systematic reinforcement of reality's boundaries through deliberate cultivation of justice, remembrance, and restoration. Each act of historical acknowledgement, each instance of reparation, each moment of genuine empathic connection strengthened the protective barriers their rituals had established. The ultimate truth, preserved within the repository's most carefully guarded documents, revealed that cosmic horror could never be permanently vanquished, only perpetually contained through vigilance renewed with each generation. The forest sanctuary stood not merely as monument to past confrontation, but as living blueprint for humanity's continued survival within a multiverse, where boundaries between realities required constant maintenance through conscious intention and collective remembrance. The midnight orchids began to bloom out of season, their iridescent petals unfurling beneath a crescent moon that hung like a reaper's scythe against the velvet darkness. Throughout the sanctuary, the ancient trees creaked and swayed not with wind but with anticipation, their gnarled branches forming momentary sigils visible only from certain angles and only to those with the bloodline's sight. The 13th alignment approached its final phase, cosmic forces gathering with inexorable purpose above a land forever altered by that singular night of birth and banishment. Amidst the repository's carefully preserved collection, a previously undiscovered journal emerged from between floorboards that had concealed it for more than a century and a half. The leather binding bore no markings, yet those who touched it experienced immediate recognition, an ancestral memory activating within their consciousness. The pages contained Althea's own account, written not in her hand, but through Opal's careful transcription during those final hours before the 31 abominations emerged. "They believe they plant their seed in fertile ground," she had dictated, her voice transcending imminent physical agony. "Yet they fail to understand that the earth herself possesses consciousness far older than their corrupted bloodlines. What gestates within me watches through my eyes yet remains separate, a parasite believing itself master while the host prepares silent resistance." The document revealed Althea's deliberate invitation of the entities, not through surrender, but through calculated sacrifice. She had recognized the pattern after witnessing Augustus Thornfield's communion with the forbidden texts, understanding that the 13th generation required a vessel aware of its own corruption to complete the manifestation. Her resistance had never been mere victimhood but strategic intervention, her consciousness forming the final barrier that prevented complete incursion. Upon the magnolia's highest branches perched 13 indigo butterflies arranged in perfect constellation formation, their wings pulsing with synchronized purpose as they released microscopic spores that drifted through the nocturnal forest. Where these luminous particles settled, temporal windows briefly opened, glimpses across probability's vast spectrum revealing the sanctuary's multidimensional nature. For fleeting moments, visitors observed the forest as it existed simultaneously across 13 distinct timelines, from primordial swampland to future configurations beyond human comprehension. The protective mist that had maintained the sanctuary's boundaries for generations now condensed into more deliberate manifestation, forming spectral figures that walked alongside living descendants, ancestral guardians made momentarily visible as the cosmic alignment approached completion. Their forms carried both warning and reassurance, their expressions conveying the burden of vigilance that would soon pass fully to the living. Beneath soil enriched by centuries of remembrance, Althea's physical remains had long since returned to elemental components, yet something of her essence persisted, not as conventional ghost, but as fundamental recalibration of reality itself. The sanctuary had become her extended body, its boundaries her skin, its atmospheric variations her breath, its temporal anomalies her heartbeat. What the Thornfield brothers had attempted to corrupt had instead transcended, evolving into protection that encompassed dimensions they had sought to exploit. The 13th hour approached with inexorable certainty, cosmic gears aligning for the final confrontation that would either permanently seal the boundaries between realms or witness their catastrophic dissolution. Throughout the sanctuary, descendants gathered in solemn preparation, their birthmarks glowing with internal luminescence as ancestral knowledge activated within their blood, preparing them for responsibilities no formal education could convey. The 13th hour struck not with mundane chimes but with resonant vibrations that penetrated the very marrow of existence. Constellations completed their ancient choreography, 13 celestial bodies aligning precisely with 13 earthly nodes. The forest sanctuary exhaled collectively, every leaf, root, and creature united in momentary suspension between heartbeats. Time itself seemed to stretch like pulled taffy, moments expanding into eternities within the space between seconds. The gathered descendants stood in perfect formation beneath the magnolia's spreading canopy, their butterfly birthmarks now luminous enough to cast shadows. From their throats emerged a harmonic progression no earthly composer had ever transcribed. Tones that existed in spaces between conventional notes, frequencies that restructured molecular bonds through pure vibration. This living symphony carried within it fragments of Althea's original resistance, Opal's protective incantations, and Jeremiah's meticulous documentation woven together into cosmic countermeasure. Above them, reality itself grew thin. The barrier between dimensions, that protective membrane the Thornfield abomination had nearly penetrated, became momentarily visible as iridescent ripples across the night sky. Through this translucent veil could be glimpsed suggestions of what waited beyond, geometries that violated Euclidean principles, entities composed of concepts rather than matter, patient consciousnesses that had observed humanity since before mammals drew breath upon Earth. The final confrontation manifested not through spectacle, but through perfect stillness. The midnight orchids released their collective essence in synchronized exhalation, pollen forming elaborate three-dimensional equations that hung suspended in the forest air. These mathematical expressions, incomprehensible to conventional understanding yet instantly recognized by the bloodline's intuition, represented the final solution to cosmic incursion. From soil that had absorbed 13 generations of suffering and resilience rose the ultimate manifestation of Althea's transcended consciousness, not as spectral apparition, but as fundamental restructuring of reality's underlying principles. The forest sanctuary expanded beyond geographical constraints, its protective essence replicating simultaneously across 13 globally distributed nodes, establishing permanent interdimensional barriers precisely where cosmic corruption had sought ingress. The descendants' voices reached harmonic culmination, producing vibrations that permanently altered quantum probability states. What had been theoretical became manifest, reality itself choosing the configuration that absolutely prohibited entities from manifesting through human vessels. The cosmic equation balanced with mathematical perfection, the 13th alignment completing not merely a cycle but an eternal solution. As dawn approached with rose-gold fingers reaching through ancient trees, the gathered witnesses observed the final miracle, the repository documentation transforming from mere physical record into knowledge embedded within creation itself. The papers dissolved into luminous particles that merged with the forest essence, their contents becoming fundamental law rather than historical account. Across the sanctuary, indigo butterflies took flight in unified purpose, carrying this restructured reality to destinations beyond human tracking. The cosmic horror that had nearly manifested through Thornfield corruption found itself permanently contained, not through violence or banishment but through fundamental recalibration of what could exist within human reality. The descendants dispersed with solemn understanding, carrying within them knowledge that would express itself through generations yet unborn. The forest returned to apparent ordinariness, its extraordinary nature concealed once more behind veils of sublime camouflage. All that remained as visible evidence was a single midnight orchid growing from the exact spot where Althea had endured her cosmic labor, its petals containing, for those with eyes to see, the complete mathematical proof of humanity's enduring resilience. This has been the Ghastly Journal. Until next time, remember that some stories are best left untold.